And before we jump into this, I want to tell you about little changes going on in my life. I have, as of the end of the year, I've ended my tenure with Generis, and I took some time during the initial part of COVID to just find out if God has something for everyone through this thing. This isn't stuff isn't just happening because it was a mistake. God has something for everyone. I just sought God. It was a long process. Took me a long time, but I'm working for a AG World Missions Organization now, Builders International. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not.
Yeah, I get their emails.
Yeah, we do. Got some neat stuff going on. I'll probably keep you posted on them. They do some really neat things, some fun things.
Anyway, Phil, I sent you a few questions to start with. So we're going to launch with the best practices that you've seen around the country. How can you help us?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And here's the thing. The most of us, especially guys, we want to do something real quick and change things real quickly. And the good news is that's what we wish. The bad news is that's not how it happens. And I've got a few barbecue pits, and I'm really into smoking meat, and been at that for 30 years, I guess. And what it does, you have to create a culture. You have to get a fire going at a real steady temperature over a long time, and then wonderful things happen. But most guys are the charcoal grill guy, and it won't get going. So you try to pour some more charcoal lighter fluid, and you get a big boom like that. And that's sort of how money is in the church. We think if we preach a sermon, and if you preach on tithing, you're gonna get some money in the next few weeks. You have a spike, but then it goes away. And so the best thing to do is do the low and slow, like the barbecue, where it's sustained over a long time. And so there are some things that I found, and one of the things is, man, everybody says this, but in fact, AG did it a few years ago. They sent packets out to every pastor about their mission and their vision. But a church really has to look at why they exist. Why, let's really be honest. Why do we exist? And that has to be communicated to your people on a regular basis. If you're a church that exists to reach down and out people, well, then say it. Or if you're a church that is more about a church that's reaching very stable families, and you want to build up the family, say that, because people financially support what they understand. And if you say your mission is to reach the world, we want to bring all people to Jesus Christ, and whatever that is, and what they see week to week in the church isn't lining up, then they don't understand what are we really doing here, and they don't financially support what they don't understand. And so I can go through a few more for you, but stop me anytime, because I could get rolling on this subject.
Yeah, that's what we want. That's why we're here.
Churches that are generous, they understand that people are not inspired to give to everyday operating needs. They're inspired to give to vision that will change eternities and bring hope to hopeless situations. And so one of the worst things a church can do, there's times, there's that time where you gotta pull the fire alarm and say, hey guys, the building's burning down. But money does not follow a cry for need. If there's always we want to put more staff people on, or we're really not going to be able to do this year because we don't have the funds, pretty soon, once or twice people will support that, but then it gets to the point where they're like, there's always going to be need here. That, I'm giving and nothing's changing. And so what people give to is inspiring vision, is what's happening with the dollars that we're giving. And most churches are not real good at telling their story. And every church has a really good story. I mean, there's things that pastor, that you hear all during the week, and you're like, oh, that's cool, that's neat. But it never gets to the ears of the people in the congregation. And so they really want to know that their church, when they give their money, they assume that they have to pay the pastor and pay the light bill and all that. Traverse City pay the heat bill, and but they really want to know what's the big eternal change here. And so, and then people, they want to, if you're painting vision, they want to know that it's really doable. We want to give a backpack to every kid in our county. Well, that's not going to happen. It's, unless you're a mega church with mega dollars, they want to know that when they give, it's bringing change, and it's bringing real change. It's not just keep giving and we're this fuzzy thing. We want to change our community for Jesus. That's great. But show me specific ways that you're doing that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then a biggie, and Pastor, I think when we worked together, I might have talked to you about this. I find that the church is not real good about thanking people for their giving. And most churches send out a year-end statement because the IRS says you have to, and they'll put a nice letter in it, thank people. But if you give to any organization other than the church, they'll kill you with thanking you, right? Then sometimes you look at it and you go, man, I'm only giving $20 a month there. Seems like they're spending $2 or $3 every month to thank me, right? But if we only had like 45 seconds on this call, and you said, Phil, tell me one thing I can do right now to help move the needle. And I do a lot of coaching with pastors now. I used to do all capital campaigns. Now I do a lot of culture cultivation on generosity. And the one thing that I get the most feedback from that was very effective, it's like this: put this on your to-do list, and that's to take the people in your church who give faithfully. Let's say a church has I want to do easy math. So let's say a church has 120 faithful families who give. Okay, then I have the pastor divide that up into that would be 10 a month. There should be 10 thank you notes a month go out from the pastor that just says, it's really simple. It says, guys, thanks so much for your faithfulness in serving us at Living Hope, and for your financial support. We couldn't do it without you. 2 quick sentences, boom. And pastors tell me, I've coached this guy up in New York City now 4 times, and he says, Phil, he called, we just had a recent conversation. He said, I need you to beat me up again about those notes, because he said, and it's a pretty big church. He says, I never come into church on a Sunday without having someone say, Pastor, I need to see you. Thank you so much for that note. And the reason is the church isn't good at it. We're not good at saying thank you, and we need to get better. So if you want to do something for a real quick return, that's the one there. Mm-hmm. And then generous churches, they have a system. They have that as a system for thanking people, and then they make sure that if there's an unusual gift, that never goes unnoticed. So someone's aunt dies, leaves them some money, and they drop a $15,000 check into the church. That should never go unnoticed. That should be a personal contact from the pastor, and just saying, hey, thank you so much. I know there's, I know your aunt, or how, if you know the story, and she would be so honored with that you honor the church. So you have regular givers, thank them, unusual givers, thank them. And then the other one is when someone gives to the church for the first time, they are making a statement. They're saying, I'm going one step deeper with this church. This is, I'm trusting this pastor. I'm trusting these people, and I'm going to go a next step deeper. And that should always be acknowledged. That should be your finance team should say every week, say, here's people who gave for the very first time. And same thing, a note. Handwritten notes are so ridiculously rare anymore because of emails and all. If they get a note saying, hey, the finance team let me know that you took the next step and gave for the first time at Living Hope. I just want to tell you thanks, and if there's anything I can do to connect you further, can I connect you with a small group, or just is there a need in your family? Is there something in your family or in your life that we could minister to? Those to do things are over time will really move the needle for churches. And now, do you, Pastor, let me ask you this, just personally at Living Hope, do you all do any, do you do what we call an offering moment, other than say, hey, it's time to take the offering up? Do you do a focus around that?
We have in the past. We don't currently do it. With COVID, the offering kind of got moved to the end of the service, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do a moment at the end, because at the end we're focusing on our altar time and that response time. So I'm still trying to solve that.
When did you do it before COVID?
After worship, between the sermon, we did the offering.
Yeah. That's very standard, and that's how my church does it. I would encourage you to do this, and to do an offering moment. Say, hey, we're not going to pass the plates. COVID changed that, at least for a while, but it's pretty amazing what God's doing around here. And man, this past week we had a bunch of our kids go on the retreat. Whatever it is that happens, and always find something that happened. And I'm going to tell you that lives were changed. These kids came back fired up, and you know why that happens? Because we have a youth pastor who cares about them. We have a youth pastor who says, I'm going to get my kids to events that discipled them. Or maybe it wasn't a retreat. Maybe, hey, last Friday night, whatever night your youth night is on, we had kids, about 40% of them were kids that don't come to church here. And man, what a cool thing to see them worshiping and just experiencing God. And that's because of your faithful giving. Your generosity makes that happen. And what people want is ROI. They want a return on their investment. And if we're not showing them a return on their investment, then subconsciously it's like, just the same old stuff's happening. We're paying the salaries and all that. So yeah, I encourage, because most churches will do this. They'll say, well, yeah, that's a great idea, but then they run out of steam. Okay. I'll be in Jacksonville, Florida, next week, working with the church, and I've worked with them before, and they're having me lay out for the next quarter, every offering moment, what it should look like. Okay. And it's very simple. The first week, for them is Missions Week. Show a missions video, talk about someone that you support with your missions. And then the next week is, what are you doing outside of the church locally? Who are you reaching? Whose lives are you changing? The next week, it's what's happening inside the church. That's the youth group. Hey, the youth group, the kids, the whatever that is that you're talking about. And then the fourth week, they're just going to give some biblical foundations for giving, and that's all part of their offering moment. And they just connect that to giving. These outreaches, our church is known for, I used backpacks before. Our church is known for backpacks and for caring about our community. Whether we get anything in return, that's because of your generosity. And yeah.
So one of the things I've struggled with is that, especially when we help someone internally, maybe a benevolence thing or food pantry stuff, it's hard to toot that horn because those people are sitting there, and you don't want to be too vulnerable with that. Is there a way to kind of be generic about that? Because we've helped a number over this Christmas season. We've helped a number of people in significant ways, but
yeah,
struggle with that.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. In fact, that's the one place where the Bible talks about giving, not to let it be known, and that's in areas of benevolence. I think a side, it's not a benefit, but a side effect of that, if you concentrate too much on benevolence, what you get is a lot more benevolence request.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's people that they're hearing it and going, oh, that's where I can get my rent paid. So I just think, I think it's one of those things. Christmas is a great time. Say, hey, we were able to bless a number of families that are just in unusually hard times right now. And there's all different situations, but I can tell you what, every one of those families was blessed, and they're thankful for a church who said, hey, we care enough. We see what's going on in your life. They didn't have to come to us. We didn't have to go looking. They're people that were genuinely hurting. And, I just want to thank you, church, for being the kind of church that does that for people. And yeah, I don't think you can now I have been in church services where, they say we have a need, and it was a very large church. It was James River, in fact, where I was there was a single mom who needed a van, and they do I think it's $1 offering, and they say that everybody give $1. Of course, a lot of people give $100, whatever. And that was a special thing where they could say what it was. They didn't say who the person was, but I think generally you're right. I think you have to be careful not to embarrass that person, and to do it in a way that you're not attracting more requests for benevolence just because they know the church, that's what the church does.
Good. Anything else as far as best practices go?
Yeah, people have to know what you're talking about. I mean, one of the biggies anymore, whenever I coach a church, I ask for numbers from them, and then we do some sort of interviewing with the staff, and sometimes with lay people. And the term tithe is not what you and I think it is. And I think there's a time that you have to say, you hear us talking about the tithe, and what does that mean? And I think you really have to be really specific. And I, one pastor he did it sort of jokingly. He said, if you got paid $1,000 last week, he says, you take a decimal point and you move it 2 points to the left. And that's, I think, is that right? 2 points or 1 point? Well, let me write it down. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1 point to the left. Yeah. And that's your 10%. And, but I think we have to explain the tithe. And when we do our surveying, when I'm coaching, you'd be shocked. you would be shocked what people say the tithe is. And it's, I've had really good staff people. One really large church, the best we could determine, there was only one staff person other than the pastor and the exec pastor. It was only one staff person who was really tithing. The rest said, I support, I have a friend who's a missionary in Korea. Another one, my mom and dad are in nursing homes. And then later on, sort of a trick question, how much of your giving, what percent goes to that particular church? None of them were at 10%, but they all said they tithed, every single one of them. So I think we have to define the tithe. And then the other thing is this, are you familiar with Nelson Sears, a guy named Nelson Searcy?
I am.
His book, I think it's called The Generosity Ladder or Giving Ladder, something like that. We have to help people. We have to help them go from where they are to the next step. And it's always been all or nothing. Either you're a tither or you're not a tither. That's all there is to it. And we don't do that with people who are smoking. I mean, we love when God miraculously heals someone that habit, but if they can make progress and then eventually stop that habit, we rejoice in that, right? And when it comes to giving, to tell someone who can't make their bills that they have to tithe on top of it, they just go like, I don't want to hear it, right? And so I think we have to have processes that are known. And the generosity ladder, I think a church ought to use that every so many months and have a step ladder on the platform and say, we talked about everyone here, including the guys like all of us that are tithers, about taking another step, going deeper in our commitment. And is this the time? This is the end of March? Is this a time for us to look and say, God, would you help me take one step up that ladder? And I really think we have to have things to help people become fully committed givers, and not not just say you have to do it or else. That's it. And, yeah. But the big thing is telling the story of the church. I mean, that's it. Usually we think of tithing and giving as a transaction, and what we really wanted is their heart to change so that they want to give. And we want that transformation of the heart. More of a discipleship process is what you would that's what I would see in generous churches.
Super. Yeah. Talk to the pastor that is just more is going out than is coming in.
Yeah.
Maybe the church has undergone a little bit of an exodus or a pruning, and now you've got 3 people on staff, and you got each year is 10 to 20% in the negative. Yeah, that's tough. I mean that's it's not a business, but that's the business side of it, and man, it really hurts because pastors give everything they have to the church, and they're so committed, and so many of them, their kids and their wife are they're just as committed as they are, and then comes the end of the year, everybody's getting raises, and they're like, how, what are we going to do with our friends that are on staff? We can't afford to pay them. That's just a tough situation to be in. And really there's no magic to it. There's no like, oh, if you do this, that'll change. I just think that there has to be assessments throughout the year, and we have to be honest and say, why is there 20% less? Is it something that I should change? Is it something that I'm getting feedback and I'm digging in?
In other words, they're all wrong, I'm all right. And is it that you haven't been casting vision? Is it that you've been having church and not casting vision? And then I think you can cast vision and you can be all in, and you can have people who are very much part of the world system now, where they want everything, but they don't want to pay for everything. And so I believe that there comes a time that hard choices have to be made. And man, I used to own a business, and when I had to let someone go, I never had to let them go because we weren't making money, but man, I lost sleep for a week, right? It's not easy, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to make the ship, to keep the ship sailing. But I really think that if there's a steady downward, there's things. When I worked with you, Detroit was going through an awful mess. The pastor can't change that. But if the economy is going good and things are good in the area, and there's a steady decline, then I would say you have to take a look at is there something inward. The other thing is this: if you want to grow, sometimes you have to invest in the area you want to grow in. And so if you're years and years and years ago, 20 years ago, I was invited to a church. I won't even say what state, but they all had suits on, which was not that unusual at the time. The board, and they're all white-haired guys, and they're talking to me. I was a lot younger than them at that time, and they said, "Yeah, all of our people are leaving and going to." They named the church. I know the church very well, and I said, "Why is that?" "Well, they'll do anything for the kids over there. They don't." I was like, I said, "Guys, listen to yourself. Listen to it. You're trying to hold on to the ship that's going down, and you know the answer why people are leaving." So sometimes you have to reallocate resources, like a business person would, and invest in an area that you want to go towards. If you want to attract more kids, more families, you have to have just a kicking youth program, children's program. If not, it's not going to happen.
How do you help pastors see their blind spots?
Yeah, I think the best way to do that is an honest assessment, and really that is to like if you as general presbyter now, or if you were helping a pastor, I think I would probably have some assessment tool that they could complete. Some of the assessment tools that I've seen over the years are it's a personal assessment, and then it's an assessment that 3 or 4 other people do about the pastor. Okay. And pastors are, of course, they're going to suggest their best friends to be the ones that do the assessment, but just to sit down with a pastor and say, and talk about what's going wrong. Usually we don't get too far that way. I think you have to have a real tool that says, "Hey, well, look, now you said this about your ministry. Why do you feel that's happening?" Otherwise, the conversation goes every which way except in a straight direction. So I really think a good assessment tool is the best way to approach that.
Super. How do you know when to give raises or when to cut salaries? How do you assess that?
Yeah. So I believe that unless a church just can't do it, every staff person should always get a cost of living raise. That we whatever we have established that their worth is, we should at least keep them up with the cost of living. That's a across the board that should be happening. But I'm a proponent of on a church that has staff that the pastor, now other people believe otherwise, but I believe the pastor is the one who determines who gets the raises and how much. Okay. Because he's with them day in and day out. He knows how effective they are. Let me use an example of worship pastor. Man, they're crazy good on stage and all, but during the week, they're just disruptive around the church, or they don't come in when they're supposed to, or their habits aren't good. Well, the board would look at that and say, oh, we want to give Mrs. Worship Pastor this much of a raise. And so I'm a proponent that if raises are in order, that the board determines how much the pastor's raise is, and then there's a pool of resources for the pastor to divvy up in the way that he sees best. And staff people, how do you determine whether they get a raise or a cut? I think it's part of the hiring process. If they're already hired, I think there has to come a time where you address this and say, hey, every year we're going to assess how things are going, how effective your ministry is, how diligent you are, and that all goes into how you're compensated. I never want to give you less than what you're making, but I just have to be honest. If I see things that I've addressed with you and there's not a correction, there's really only two courses that we can go. One is that we just part company, and that's I hope it never comes to a drastic thing like that. The other one is we can't not pay those areas that are effective and continue to pay give raises in an area where there's no desire to change. And so a church board, when they're deciding on raises, I think the mentality of the church board, I believe the lead pastor in most cases at some time has to educate them as to what goes into being a pastor, and that there is an expectation that they will compensate fairly and generously. And I was in the presence of a pastor who I'm like, whew, how did I get in this meeting, right? But he was a church planter. He was about 4 years into the deal. And he says, look, he says, guys, he says, we had a great year this year. And he says, I'm gonna say his wife's name, Mary, so I don't, it's a made up name. He says, it's time for you guys to bring us up to speed. He said, for the first 4 years, we worked at less than what we could live on and what was right, but that was for the church. But now it's time for you to accelerate that. And the board did it. They're like, man, but without his guidance, he would have gone into year 5 the same way. And I think a pastor has to say, guys, I'm not going to tell you how to pay me, what to pay me, but I do want to remind you that it's been a good year at the church. We've had a good year. And I want you to consider that when you're giving raises to the entire staff. And I want you to consider that when you're determining my raise. I think that's leadership. I think leaders help, because a lot of church boards, they're looking for someone to give them guidance. They don't really know. But generally speaking, when does if the church is doing good, if it's growing and finances are growing, then raises are in order. If we're in the middle of COVID and it's not growing numbers wise, but a pastor is keeping the ship held together, and finances are, most churches are telling me the finances are pretty close to what they were pre-COVID, right? Then then the pastor needs to convey that. Say, guys, these last 2 years has been tough on this staff. They are just worn out, and they're doing everything they have in them. And I want you to, when you determine what the salary raises should be, I want you to consider, even though we didn't go up, we stayed about the same. I want them compensated for what they've gone through over these last 2 years. So extenuating circumstances, when you don't have an increase in pay, the pastor has to go to bat. And then when things are going the wrong way, then there's tough decisions have to be made. And I think that's hard. That's hard on a staff to hear that, because they're given everything they have, and now here you go, you're taken away from me. But you can't pay them what you don't have. Now, staff would be really good to show you where you don't need to be spending your money. And you're talking about a cut in my pay or no raise, but you're spending money on this. Well, if that's an honest assessment, then the senior pastor or lead pastor has to know that. But generally speaking, the short answer is this: if this was a business, and this is the business side of it, and the church is doing good, and it looks like we're going into a good year, the pastor should receive a raise, and so should the staff, a raise past the cost of living. And raises do two things: they affect the wallet, and they affect the very soul of people, the very heart. If you tell a pastor who's just been knocking it out of the park and we're just giving you cost of living, that's a kick in the gut. I mean, that is a kick in the gut. And it's the same for staff. If you can't pay them, you can't. But if you can, you have to remember that it's two things. It's the wallet and it's the heart that are affected by the raise.
One of the things that we've done, because once you give a raise, it's tough to get it back if you need it, is implement a bonus structure. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the year, the board will say, okay, how did we do? And then give me an amount to say, divvy this up with the staff. Mm-hmm. And just like you said, they'll give me the discretion because I know the day-to-day operations and who the thoroughbreds are and who the non-thoroughbreds are. And so that has helped us to then say, well, we could give, let's say, 10 grand in bonuses, but if that 10 grand went into raises, now we're committed. It's not that we haven't given raises, but once you give it, you're committed. So the bonus structure is there, and our staff knows that, if the year isn't that great, then the bonuses aren't going to be that great. Yeah. So it kind of gives them some skin in the game as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a system that has a lot of merit for the very things you said. And of course, everything that we do has to be done with the right heart and the right motives. And, I'm a pastor's kid, and, I'm really used to pastors' families being on staff. But sometimes when churches use a bonus system or whatever, sometimes they're not as fair as they should be. But that's not a reason to kick out the system. It's a reason to look at our own motives. Why are we really? Why is this person really receiving this and that one's not? And and it's just you're right. It is hard to go backwards. It's really hard to go backwards. And that's a system that if the culture there accepts it, that's great. Yeah.
Talk to me about just the basic percentage. You're starting a church or you're doing a revite and they hand you this here. These are our numbers. Yeah. Where do you start?
Yeah. So there are some basic categories, and since we're talking about AG churches, I'm going to include missions, and I'm going to say this about missions in AG churches. There's nobody does as much for missions as the AG. I'm telling you, I've worked for years now, mostly AG churches, but some big churches, and I'll ask them about their missions, and they might have $10,000 a year they're giving to world missions with a $5 million budget. And so yeah. But in the AG, here's some basic guidelines. There's circumstances in each case, but missions, I believe that it should be 10 to 15% of the total budget should go to missions. And then salaries and benefits. This is a number that's all over the board. I've it used to be 40 to 50%. I think it's closer to 45 to 55%, somewhere there now. But traditionally, it was about half of your budget going towards salary and benefits. And then discipleship and education, about 10 to 20% of that. And then administratively, that's usually, I don't know, maybe 5-7%. Technology changes that a lot, and technology eats a lot more money up than it used to.
What would you put in the admin in that category? What kinds of things?
Admin would be it's not the salaries for the admin, okay? It's office supply, it's equipment, it's repair, the copy machine contract, probably, and it does include things like purchasing of equipment. That's why a church needs to do what well-run businesses do and say, hey, we're going to put 1% or whatever that is aside for new acquisitions, new machinery, new equipment, whatever that is. And but yeah, that's what it includes: office supplies, new equipment, repair, computer expenses, things like that.
Okay. Anything else? Any other big?
Yeah, and then the other one, I don't think I think I did it. Yeah, I did. Evangelism. It's like 5 to 10% for that, and then facilities is 15 to 30%. And if you have a really large mortgage, if a lender has let you lend or borrow, as much as you can, then you may find that facilities go higher than that. But that's generally the range that the churches talk about, 15 to 30%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. James, Christine, you guys have any questions?
Either they don't or they're on mute. So
yeah, I don't know. Okay. I don't see him.
Sorry, I had a delivery right at this time. Can you shut that?
Oh, okay.
I missed that last part. The facilities 15 to 30%. What was the last category?
You want me to run through them real quick for you?
I got missions, salaries and benefits, discipleship and education, admin / technology, evangelism, facilities, and I missed
facilities is like 15 to 30%. Did you
was
get
that the last category?
Yeah.
And I think I heard you ask if there was any questions.
Yeah.
So again, very new to all this, and I was an HEW missionary, so I'm not new to raising funds or raising a budget, but I stepped into a church, a revitalization, 40 years old, one pastor, didn't even have a budget. So
what city is it?
Leslie. It's a small town community. So between Lansing and Jackson, a bedroom community, only 2,500 in the community, but it's between two cities on the highway. 20-year-old building that was their second building, but it's not had any renovation so it was built in 2000, but it was built with 2000 with the 80s in mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Uh-huh.
right. So everything is really, we got just so many different things that need to be addressed. One of the, and maybe this is one question I can start with. One of the, I don't know, things that I've heard, or kind of one of the cultural sets of this church, and maybe it's true, and I've heard it before actually, is that the senior pastor shouldn't know the specifics of giving, like shouldn't know who gives what or what. How does that, because I mean, obviously as a missionary, that's not what happened. And like, how do I write letters, like the things you're talking about? How would I do that if I have no idea who's giving?
All right.
Or so maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, don't get me, I'm going to say this, don't get me started, okay? My opinion, okay? Now it is almost 50-50 pastors who know and pastors who don't. That's what they say. I believe that most pastors know, okay? I don't believe it's 50-50, but I believe, and my colleagues believe, I mean, after doing this for 20 some years, the pastor should know. The pastor is the shepherd, and he is the CEO. And so here's a couple of reasons why. One, for practical reasons. Believe it or not, people leave the church occasionally. Okay. It really is a good business thing to find out what does that really mean on a financial basis. Okay. You look and you go, man, oh man, we hate losing them. Oh my goodness. I didn't realize they didn't even give. Well, it's terrible that you lost them, but it's not going to set you back, especially in a church that's not a large church. It's not going to set you back financially. Right. So business wise, it's important. The other thing is, we don't look at dollars to dole out influence, or to to allow this person to have more or less influence. But it is important to know if someone has a lot of opinions about things and they're not giving. Well, I'm just human. I'm not God. I'm going to take their opinions with less importance. I really am. I mean, that's not to say if someone's a top giver and they're pushing something that's wrong, that you go with that. But it is important to know who has a lot to say. Do they have a lot to give? Okay. But here's the better reason to know. You are the shepherd, and giving is an indication of what's going on in our life. Okay. It's an indication of the lordship of God in our life. It's giving is a heart issue. It's not just a wallet issue. It's a heart issue. Jesus said it. Said, where your heart is and your treasure is, vice versa. So you have Bill Adams and his wife. They give $100 every week faithfully, and you know that. And you look at the report, say at the end of the month. I mean, I'm not saying every month you look at it. And the Adams are now they're giving $50. Okay. Is there something pastoral that you need to do? Do you need to sit down without saying, hey, Bill, and call her Susan, I noticed your tithing went down? No, I'm not talking about that. Hey guys, how about we get together, have lunch, have coffee. Just say, hey, I'm just wondering how things are going with you. And a lot of times there's something that's going on in their life spiritually that meeting is gonna help them to communicate. And maybe it's, hey, Pastor, we're really embarrassed about this, but we have an adult daughter who's addicted to something, and we've had to put her in a $12,000 a month rehab, and man, we don't know how we're going to do it, and we know we're not supposed to do this, but that's a time for you as a pastor to say, guys, we love you, and the money, don't let that be an issue. We want to come beside you. We want to walk with you and pray with you through this. If you didn't know what's going on dollar wise, you would never know that. And then there's also many times people will stop giving before they leave. Money, we call them lapsed givers, okay? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. There might be something that is, maybe the youth pastor did something really goofy, right? And it just morally or principally, they can't deal with it. It's like, man, I can't support a church that. And it's going to be the same thing. Guys, just wondering how you're doing spiritually and how your walk with the Lord. And those are shepherding times. And then there's also that time when somebody starts giving. And that's why, if you don't know, how are you going to thank them? How are you going to say, thanks for taking this next step in your growth with the Lord? And so, yeah, we believe that you should. There's your assistant. And,
yeah, that's one of my assistants there. You want to say hello?
Hi.
hey, how are you? But yeah, we believe it's important. Hey,
When Dad gets COVID, everybody gets quarantined.
there we go. Yeah.
I did it for you.
I'm with Phil, Miss James. I have found it very beneficial to know who's giving. From a pastoral standpoint, it is a measure of the heart. Where the treasure is, the heart is. And so I kind of look at it as a blood pressure, that if you went to the doctor and they never measured your blood pressure because they thought, well, I don't need to know that. No, it's a good measure of spiritual vitality. Now, pastors would tell me, well, I don't want to know because I don't want to treat anybody differently. And you have to work through that, but you force your bookkeeper to know.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
who's the spiritual head of the church? Is the bookkeeper the spiritual head, or are you the spiritual head? And then the other thing that it's not without struggle, knowing the main struggle I've had isn't when people give a lot of money. It's when people who should don't.
Yeah.
Right.
Then I have to work through and process, and not to take it out on the congregation through the pulpit, through prayer, and you have to handle it in a healthy way. So that's, for me, the test hasn't ever been, oh, wow, that person gave a lot of money, how can I fawn over them? That was never my deal. In fact, the reason I like to know the big givers is who to ask more of. You don't give them special treatment. The special treatment you give is you ask them to do more, not to do less. Or give them the best seats, but to ask them to serve in their giftings. The other thing is that we'll applaud people with all the other giftings in the church, but the gift of giving never gets thanked because we don't know.
That's right.
So those are things that have helped me. And I have in my desk, these are the notes that I send to people.
Here we go.
That because I know, and I'll send them to people who, man, there's just old ladies who are faithful over the years that have given more than people who are financially well off. And I have to struggle with that personally, but I want to applaud the ones who are, and I want to encourage the ones and challenge the ones who aren't. And it's knowing blood pressure like a doctor.
Good. And you're so right. You're so right. If you deal with those issues of, well, I think I'm going to pastor them differently or whatever, that's a growth area for you. To say,
right.
God,
you're asking the bookkeeper, they have to be in fellowship with those people too.
Yeah.
And so, I think
that makes sense to me. Yeah.
And when it comes to the area of gifting, Pastor, you're right. If we had someone who came to the church from, let's say, Hillsong or Bethel Music or whatever, they were really good. And after a few months, I think we would say, hey, would you guys consider being in the worship band, right? Well, it's the same with people who should be giving. Okay, they have the resources. There's a time that we ask them to give, and like Pastor said, there's no favor shown. Actually, it's more obligation. But you said it very well. It's the only area in the church that we don't try to cultivate that gifting. It's very good.
Right.
Anything else, James or Christine, before we wrap it up?
No, this has been really good. Sorry I popped in late. Was in the middle of something, but great great information. I wrote down a lot of notes. And James, I just wanted to say that I think you just described my church.
Right.
Here I
Yeah.
am in Rapid City. You know, it's a small town.
Very
and
much
there's
so. Yeah.
3 churches and hardly anybody at any one of them. So small church, a lot of things to do, not a lot of people to do the things that need done. So a lot of what you were saying, it really, like, I couldn't identify with it because in this area, you're talking about budgets and having people that are giving and all of this. And I'm like, oh, I wish I had that.
Sure.
So,
You know, one of the things, and especially in a small community, regardless of how much money there is, I should have said this earlier, Pastor, about churches that in what I see that qualities of generous churches. One of the things you have to fight is a tin cup mentality, and that's hey, could you give just a little just to help us out? Okay, it really is. You have to have that. Man, we have a big vision, and your giving is helping us see that vision happening, and that's a really important. Just check your mind occasionally and your staff. Okay, one of the things, Pastor Carey, that I see big time is the lead pastor is not mentoring people on his staff how. And he's carrying the whole, or she is carrying the whole financial burden, okay? And the staff has no idea how much money there is or whatever. And when they go to be a lead pastor, my church is in the transition after 30 years of taking our youth pastors becoming our pastor. He doesn't know anything about how the dollar side of this runs. So it's important to that we don't just learn this ourselves, we pass it on. And then that tin cup mentality, that is one of those things. And Christine, nothing you said made me think that you have that. I'm just saying that's something that I meant to cover earlier, that you sort of can remember that phrase, tin cup mentality.
yeah.
I think it's pretty common sometimes in rural context or small town context. I think that's pretty descriptive of the way giving has been at the church I pastor for the last 40 years. It's been more like 50, 100, nothing tithing. I don't think there's any real concept of tithing. So I guess one of my questions, Phil, for you, and it's a big question, is like, if you were revitalizing, so I'm in a unique position to have a 3-year window as a U.S. missionary in part of church mobilization revitalization. So my salary is offset. The church is not paying my salary. They are a U.S. missions donor, but they're not for 3. It's like a 3-year window so we can hopefully be able to revitalize in that point. So where do you start with how do you? So I want to be able to 3 years be able to transition into salaried at some level and add staff and those things. And I'm at a little bit of a loss. I've heard a little bit of generous. I've heard of their one fund kind of mentality. I don't know if you've ran into that.
Yeah.
But I know it's a big question, but what would you do if you were me, starting from in this type of culture and mindset?
Yeah.
Where does it
I would be intentional. Okay. It would be on my calendar. And every week when I'm planning my service out, there would be, am I going into this with intentionality about giving? Okay, that's not beat them up with giving. Let's talk about generous hearts, because remember, it's a heart transformation. Okay,
right.
If you had multiple staff, I would tell you assign it to one of your staff people to say, okay, listen, the offering moment, and we're not hitting on any generosity issues in our service outline here. Okay, get it. Included in your service, be intentional, but then take some bold steps. I've worked with several churches. There's 3 or 4 churches. They're all AG down in Florida. One of them is really large. The other 2 are big. They do Robert Morris's The Blessed Life they used to do it every year. I don't know if they do, but the pastor doesn't even preach for like 5 or 6 weeks in a row. He shows the blessed life. And I'm telling you, have you ever seen his stuff? Robert Morris's. It's don't get thrown by the name, The Blessed Life. That sounds like Name It and Claim It and all that. There's nobody will communicate generosity, tithing, and giving better than Robert Morris, and your people will thank you for doing it, because he's very engaging, he's humorous, and I would definitely, and if you don't want to have him preach for 5 or 6 weeks, my home church did it. Okay. I thought it was cool, but watch them and preach, learn what he's preaching. And, but the best thing you could do is let him preach it. There's nobody can do it any better. And he's Pentecostal too. Yeah.
He's got a book of the same name.
Yeah.
That I would read. The other book I would read is Money, Greed, and God.
Mm-hmm.
And which kind of is a little more economics.
Mm-hmm.
And then Randy Elkhorn wrote a book.
Treasure Principle.
That's his small one. He wrote a big one on, I think it's Money, Possessions, and Eternity.
Okay. Yes.
Those would be my top books on this topic that will give you lots of good material and illustrations for preaching on this. We used to do probably every other year, maybe a 4 or 5 week series on money. Just to help the process. And we've also taught a class on Wednesday nights. We call The Christian's Guide to Wealth Creation. And so I always thought that, especially in the rural context, and people that are used to maybe being on public assistance in any context, they just haven't been taught. It's not taught, which is tragic to me, in our high schools on how to thrive in our economic system. So people will maybe know how to get a job. They maybe will know how to go buy stuff, but they don't know how to invest. They don't know how to start a business. They don't know that aspect of the economic sandbox. And it's tough to give what you don't have. And so I would always do 2 or 3 sermons on how to create wealth. Again, not from a hyper faith movement, but from a basic buy low, sell high, add value, solve problems. These are basic biblical concepts. And then I felt better about asking them to give, because I taught them how to create. So,
I've heard your sermons. I've heard your series on that. I think maybe when we were working together, you told me about them, and I listened to them. Yeah. If Christine and James, if you want to give me your email address, I have a book too. There's another book. It's written by the owner of Generis called Contagious Generosity. But I'll send you an e-version of that, which is a condensed version. And if you don't mind, give me your email address.
You can send it to me. I don't know if I have it.
I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I will too.
Send it to me too, Phil.
Oh, I'll definitely get it to you.
I may have it, but
yeah, and a couple other resources I have too. Let me take a picture of that. That way I won't copy it down wrong. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple other resources. I have an Excel sheet that has all those percentages on it for you that I gave you, and a church can plug their own numbers in and say, okay, here's what it looks like for us. And then I also over the years, it's just a 1-page document. It says these things exist in generous churches. I'll get that to you also. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. And it'll come from my Builders International email address. So when you see that, that's who I work for now. I just left.
Ryan's a good friend of mine. I worked with Ryan a lot in Haiti.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Good deal.
So I know the Builders International guys quite well from our post-earthquake stuff in Haiti.
Yeah. And I just joined them. I finished with Generis after, I've been doing this work for 22 years. And I just finished December 31st. So, yeah.
Oh, they're great over at Builders. I think you'll enjoy them.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Super duper.
Awesome.
Well, let me close in prayer. Lord, we're grateful for this time, and thank you for Phil in his transition and the wealth of experience he can bring to the kingdom in all aspects. And we ask you Lord, for James and Christine and for the work at Living Hope, that you would continue to pour out your Spirit. Help us, Lord. Give us an increase so that we can make you more famous and more known in our region and around the world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Awesome. Hey, Phil, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Sure. God bless. Good talking to
Thanks,
you all.
Gary, for putting this together.
Yeah, my pleasure. See you guys.
See you at Refresh.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Yeah.